Hello, welcome in. I hope you enjoy the story that is being read tonight. Please let me know in the chat if the music's too loud or whether you can hear me speaking well enough. Thank you very much, and please talk amongst yourself. The Bear's Deduction. Owing to their knowledge of woodcraft, some Indians are very clever at deduction. On Great Slave Lake near Fort Ray, an Indian cripple named Simpson's brother had joined a party of canoemen for the purpose of hunting eggs. After paddling toward a group of islands, the party separated, finally landing on a different isle. They had agreed, however, to meet at sunset on a certain island and there eat and sleep together. While at work, several of the Indians saw Simpson Bear alone on a little rocky isle, busy engaging in gathering eggs. Toward evening, the party met at the Rendezvous and took a supper together. But strange to say, Simpson's brother did not appear. After smoking and talking for a while, some grew anxious about the cripple. The bear began to fear lest some mishap had befallen him. But the caribou scoffed at the idea. He was sure that Simpson's brother was still working and that he would soon return with more eggs than any of them. The bear, however, thought they ought to search for him, as his canoe might have drifted away, but the mink replied that if anything like that had happened, the cripple would certainly have fired his gun. But how could he fire his gun if his canoe had drifted away? Asked the bear. For would not his gun be in the canoe? So they all paddled off to investigate the mystery. On nearing the island, they saw the brothers' canoe adrift. When they overhauled it, sure enough, his gun was aboard. They then landed on the little isle where the cripple had been at work and began calling aloud for him. As they received no answer, some of the Indians claimed that he must be asleep. The bear replied that if he was asleep, their shouting would have awakened him and he would have answered, but that now they had best search the island. So they divided into two parties and searched ashore in different directions until they finally met on the other side. Then they scattered and examined every nook and cranny of the place, but all in vain. Some now contended that the others were mistaken and that could not be the island on which brother had been working. But the bear, though he had not seen the cripple there, insisted that it was. They asked him to prove it. The wind has been blowing steadily from the north, replied the bear, and the other isles are all south of this one. And you know that we found his canoe adrift south of here and north of all the other islands. But that is sufficient proof. Then he added, the reason Simpson's brother did not answer is because he is not on the island, but in the water. Again they all clamored for proof, and the bear answered, but first I must find where he landed, and the quickest way to find that place is to remember the wind was blowing too strong for him to land on the north shore, and the running swells would were too strong for him to land on either the east or west sides. Therefore, he landed on the south side, just the shelter side. Now let us go and see where he drew up his canoe. But one of the other brothers, one of the others argued that would be impossible, as Simpson's brother was not such a fool as to act like a white man and drag his canoe over the rocks. The bear, however, persisted that there would be some sign, at least where the bow touched shore when the cripple got out, and that he, the bear, would go and find it. But first he would go and examine the nests to learn from which of them the cripple had removed the eggs. Thus they would learn where he had been working, and the finding of the landing place where he would be made easier. So the bear set to work. From the empty nest he soon learned where the cripple had been working, and after a careful search he presently found on a big rock a little white spot, no longer than a man's fingernail. There, my friend, is where Simpson's brother landed, for the white mark is the gum, and proves where the bow of the canoe bumped the rock. They then asked the bear where he thought the cripple was, and pointing he replied, "If we search long enough, we shall find him in the deep water down there." For when Simpson's brother was getting aboard his canoe, he slipped, and in falling struck his head upon the rock. The blow stunned him, and without a struggle he slid into the water and was now drowned. When they had brought their canoes round and had peered into the deep water true enough, they discovered the body on the bottom of the lake. Securing a long pole, they fastened a gum worm to one end and reached down, twisted it into the cripple's clothing, and brought the body to the surface. Sadly, they placed it in the unfortunate man's canoe, towed the craft and its burden to the other island, and sent to Fort Ray for the priest, Father Rohr, to come and perform the burial service. Next chapter, Beast with Human Souls. Next morning, we arose with dawn, after a hearty breakfast of fish taken from the grill net that had been set overnight below the rapid. The work of portaging around the rapids was begun, and by about 10 o'clock was finished. Noon overtook us near the mouth of Caribou River, at which we were to ascend on the first half of our journey to Ukahu's hunting grounds. About 2 o'clock we entered the stream and headed westerly toward the spur of mountains that lay about a week's travel away, and through which we had to pass to gain our winter camping ground. An hour later, as Ukahu and I preceded the party paddling up one of the channels caused by a number of large islands dividing the river into mere creeks, we chanced upon a woodland caribou bull. As it stood among the rushes in the marshy bend, watching us from a distance of not more than 40 yards. As I crouched down to be out of the hunter's way, I heard him say, "I'm sorry, my brother, but we need you for both food and clothing. So turn your eyes away before I fire." The next moment the wood echoed the report of his smooth-bore muzzle-loader. the kind of gun used by about 90% um, of the fur hunters of the forest. Why? Because of the simplicity of its ammunition. Such a gun never requires a variety of cumbersome shells for different kinds of game, but with varying charges of powder and shot or ball, it is ready for anything from a rat or duck to a bear or a moose. Before bleeding the deer, Ukahu did a curious thing. With his sharp knife, he destroyed the deer's eyes. When I questioned him as to his purpose, he replied, "As long as the eyes remain perfect, the spirit remains within his head, and I could not bear to skin the deer with its spirit looking at me." Though Ukahu was in many ways a wise old man, he held some beliefs part that were past my understanding, and others that, when I tried to analyze them, seemed to be profounded on the working of the sensitive conscience. Hearing the report of the gun, the others hurried to the scene. While the deer was being bled, the old grandmother caught the blood in a pail, into which she threw a pinch of salt to clot the blood, as she wished to use it for the making of blood pudding. Then the carcass was loaded aboard Ukahu's canoe, rather, indeed, overloaded it accordingly. I accepted Amek's invitation to board his craft, and at the first good place we all went ashore to clear the ground for the night's camp. There was a porcupine there, and though it moved but slowly away, my friend did not kill it, for they had plenty to eat, and did not want to be bothered with taking care of those dangerous little quills that the women dye and use to such good advantage in their fancy work. As to the Indian method of dressing meat and skins, more anon, when we are finally settled upon the fur trail. That evening, while flames were leaping after ascending spark and shadows were dancing behind us among the trees, we lounged about the fire on packs and blankets and discussed the evening events of the day. When I asked Ukahu why he had dressed the deer in such a manner, he replied that it was the proper and regular way to speak to an animal, because every creature in the forest, whether beast, bird, or fish, contained the spirit of some former human being. He further explained that whenever the men of the olden time killed an unusual large animal with an extra fine coat, they did not save the skin to sell to the trader, but burnt the carcass, pelt and all, and in that way they returned the body to the spirit again. Thus, they not only paid homage to the spirit, but proved themselves unselfish men. He went on to say that from the time of the great long ago, an Indian had always believed, as he did today, that every bull moose contained the spirit of a famous Indian chief, that every caribou bull contained the spirit of a lesser chief, and so on down through the whole of the animal creation. Bears, however, are rather the spirit animating them, possess the greatest power to render good or evil, and for that reason the hunter usually took the greatest care to address Bruin properly before he slew him. It is no wonder that the Indians still retain such ideas when, as Lord Avebury says, we do not know, most of us, believe that animals have souls, and yet probably the majority of mankind, from Buddha to Wesley and Kingsley, have done so. Another thing Ukahu told me was that out of respect to the dignified spirit possessed by the bull moose, women were never allowed to eat of the head, nor was the moose head to be placed upon the sled upon which a woman had ever sat. For if that were done, bad luck would follow the hunter to the end of his days. He knew of a hunter who on one occasion had been guilty of that irreverence. Afterward, whenever the hunter would see a moose, the moose, instead of trying to escape, would indifferentially bark at him, and even now follow him back close to camp. And when the hunter would go out again, other moose would do the very same thing. Moreover, the hunter was afraid to kill any moose that acted that way, for he well knew that the animal was simply warning him of some great danger that was surely going to befall him. So in the end, the hunter fretted himself to death. Therefore, every hunter should take great care to burn all the bones of the moose's head, and never on any occasion allow a woman to eat thereof, or to feed it to the dogs. In burning the head, the hunter was merely paying the homage due to so noble a creature. Again, a hunter might find that though he had formerly been a good moose hunter and had always observed every custom, yet he now utterly failed to secure the moose at all. He might come upon plenty of tracks, but the moose would always escape and prove the efforts of an experienced moose hunter of no more avail than those of a greenhorn. In such a case, there was but one thing to do, and that was to secure the whole skin, head, legs, and all, of a fawn, stuff it into its natural shape, set it upon the woods, wait till the new moon was in the first crescent, and then, just after sundown, engage a young girl to shoot 5 arrows at it from a regular hunting distance. If she missed, it was proof that the spirit had rejected the girl, and that another would have to be secured to do the shooting. If success were then attained, the hunter might go upon his hunt, well knowing he should soon be rewarded by bringing down a moose. Of course, such ideas seem strange to us, but after all, are we in a position to ridicule the Indians' beliefs? I think not. If we but recall the weird ideas our ancestors held. The Indian, like the white man, has many superstitions, some ugly and some beautiful, and of the latter class I quote one. He believes that the spirit of the stillborn child or very young infant take flight when they die, and enter the bodies of birds. A delightful thought, especially for the mother. For as Kingsley says of Saint Francis, perfectly sure that he himself was a spiritual being, he thought it at least possible the birds might be spiritual beings likewise, incarnate like himself in mortal flesh, and was no degradation to the dignity of human nature in claiming kindred lovingly with creatures so beautiful, so wonderful, who praise God in the forest, even as angels did in heaven. The forest Indian, however, is not content with merely stating that the spirit of infants enter birds, but he goes on to say that while the spirit of Indian children always enter the beings of the finest singers and the most beautiful of all the birds, the spirit of the child of white people enter the bodies of stupid, ugly birds that just squawk around and are neither interesting to look at nor pleasant to listen to, but are quarrelsome and thievish. When I asked Ukahu to name a few birds in which a spirit of white children entered, he mentioned among others the woodpecker, which the Indians consider to have proportionally the longest and sharpest tongue of all birds. That reminds me of the reply I received from one of the characters in this book. When I wrote him, among others, requesting that he grant me permission to make use of his name in order to add authority to my text. Like others, he begged me to refrain from quoting his name, as he was afraid that the information he had given me might be the cause of the Hudson Bay Company stopping his pension. I had suggested that he refer the name to his wife, as she, too, figures in the story, and the following is part of his reply. This being an affair between you and I have not consulted my wife, for as you know, the human female tongue is very similar to that of the female woodpecker, usually long and much too pointed to be of any use. The honesty of Indians. But to return to the Indian approach of the white man's dishonesty, when he states that the spirit of the white children enter only those birds that are counted great thieves, one cannot wonder at it. For as far as honesty is concerned, a comparison between the forest Indian and the white man brands the latter as a thief. Not only is that the private opinion of all the old fur traders I have met, but I could quote many other authorities. Let two, however, suffer. Charles Muir, an author of Tecumseh, and a member of the Indian Treaty Expedition of 1899, says, the writer, doubtless some of his readers can recall the time when to go to Peace River seems almost like going to another sphere, where it was conjectured life was lived very differently from that of civilized man. And truly it was to enter into an unfamiliar state of things, a region in which a primitive people, not without fault or depravities, lived on nature's food and throve on her unfailing harvest of fur, a region in which they often left their beaver, silver fox, or marten packs, the envy of fashion, lying by the dog trail or hanging to some sheltered tree, because no one stole and took their fellow's word without question, because no one lied, a very simple folk indeed. In those language profanity was unknown, and who had no desire to leave their congenital solitudes for any other spot on earth, solitudes which so charmed the educated minds who brought the white man's religion or traffic to their doors, that like the lotus eaters, they too felt little craving to depart, yet they were not regions of sloth or idleness, but of necessary toil, of the laborious chase and the endless activities of of aboriginal life, the regions of a people familiar with its fauna and flora, of skills but unconscious naturalists who knew no science, but left such as white men practice was a puzzle to these people, amongst whom it was unknown. Another example worth quoting is taken from Sir William Butler's The Wild Northland. The moose that walks arrived at Hudson's Hope early in the spring. He was sorely in want of gunpowder and shot, for it was the season when the beaver leave their winter houses and when it is easy to shoot them. So he carried his 30 marten skins to the fort to barter them for shot, powder, and tobacco. There was no person at the Hope. The dwelling house was closed and the door shut up. The man in charge had not yet come up from St. John's. Now know what was to be done. Inside that wooden house lay piles and piles of all that the moose that walks most needed. There was a whole keg of powder. There was bags of shot and tobacco. There was as much as the moose could smoke in his whole life. Though a rent in the parchment window, the moose looked at all those wonderful things, and at the red flannel shirts, and at the 4 flint guns, and the spotted cotton handkerchiefs, each worth a sable skin at one end of the fur trade, half a sixpence at the other. There was tea too, tea, that magic medicine before which life's cares vanished like snow in spring sunshine. The moose sat down to think about all these things, but thinking only made matters worse. He was short of ammunition, therefore he had no food, and to think of food when one is very hungry is an unsatisfactory business. It is true that the moose that walks had only to walk in through the parchment window and help himself until he was tired. But no, that would not do. Ah, my Christian friend will exclaim. Ah, yes, the poor Indian had known the good missionary and had learned the lesson of honesty and respect for his neighbor's property. Yes, he had learned the lesson of honesty, but his teacher, my friend, had been other than human. The good missionary had never reached the hope of Hudson, nor improved the morals of the moose that walks. But let us go on. After waiting 2 days, he determined to set off for St. John's, 2 full days' travel. He set out, but his heart failed him, and he turned back again. At last, on the 4th day, he entered the parchment window, leaving outside his comrade, to whom he jealously denied admittance. Then he took from the cask of powder 3 skins worth, from the tobacco 4 skins worth, from the shot the same, and sticking the requisite number of marten skins in the powder barrel and the shot bag and the tobacco case, he hung up his remaining skins on a nail to the credit of his account, and departed from this El Dorado, this bank of England, of the red man in the wilderness. And when it was all over, he went his way, thinking he had done a very reprehensible act, and one by one means to be proved of. If it were necessary further to establish the honesty of the forest Indian, I could add many proofs from my own experience, but one will suffice. Years ago, during my first visit to the Hudson Bay Post on Lake Temagami, when the only white man living in all that beautiful region was old Malcolm McLean, a freeman of the H.B. Company, who had married an Indian woman and became a trapper. He was invited to be the guest of the half-breed Hudson Bay trader. Johnny turned and was given a bedroom in his log house. The window of my room on the ground floor was always left wide open, and in fact was never once closed during my stay of a week or more. Inside my room, a foot from the open window, a lidless cigar box was nailed to the wall. Yet it contained a heap of bills of varying denominations, ones, fives, and tens, and even 20s. How much in all I don't know, for I never had the curiosity to count them, though at the time I guessed that there were many hundreds of dollars. It was the trader's bank. Nevertheless, beside that open window was the favorite lounging place of all the Indian trappers and hunters who visited the post. And during my stay, a group of Indians that numbered from 3 or 4 to 30 or 40 were daily loitering in the shade within a few feet of the open window. Sometimes, when I was in my room, they would even intrude their heads and shoulders through the window and talk to me. Several times I saw them glance at the heap of money, but they no more thought of touching it than I did. Yet day or night it could have been taken with the greatest ease, and the thief never discovered. But, of course, there wasn't a thief in all the region. But now that the white man had made Lake Temagami a fashionable summer resort, and the civilized Christians flocked there from New York, Toronto, Pittsburgh, and Montreal, how long would the trader's money remain in the open box beside an open window on a dark night? Excuse me. Tracking up rapids. After breakfast next morning, while ascending Caribou River, we entered a series of rapids that extended for nearly a quarter of a mile. Here and there in midstream, rocks protruded above the foaming water, and from their leeward ends flowed eddying currents of backwater that, from their dark, undulating appearance, rather suggested that every border possessed a tail. It was always from those long, flowing tails that the canoes were steering in their slow upward struggle from one rock to another, for each tail formed a little harbor in which a canoe could not only make easier headway, but also might hover for a moment while the paddlers caught their breath. Then out again they would creep, and once more the battle would rage, and, working with might and main, the paddlers would force the canoe gradually ahead and over into the eddy of another boulder. Sometime the water would leap over the gunwales and come aboard with a savage hiss. At other times the canoe seemed to become discouraged, and in their heads, almost buried beneath the angry spitting waves, would bulk in midstream and not move forward so much as a foot to the minute. It was dangerous work, but if at any time a canoe became inclined across the current, even to the slightest degree, it might be rolled over and over like a barrel descending an incline. Dangerous work it was, but it was interesting to see how powerful the Indian propelled their canoes, how skillfully they guided them, and how adroitly even the little children handled their paddles. However, we had landed safely at the head of the rapids, and upon going ashore to drain the canoe, partook of the refreshing snacks of tea and bannock, then the canoe again, then to canoe again. The aspects of the river was now very beautiful, beautiful enough to ponder over and to dream. So we took it easy. While pipes were going, we gazed in peaceful and restfulness at the reflections, for they were wonderful. After dinner we encountered another rapid, but though it was much shorter than the former, the current ran too strong to attempt the ascent with the aid of only paddles and poles. The northern tripper has the choice between 5 methods of circumventing white waters, and His selection depends on the strength of the current. First, paddling. Second, poling. Third, wading. Fourth, tracking. And fifth, portaging. You are already familiar with the method of paddling and also with that of portaging, and the description of poling will shortly follow. Wading is resorted to only when the trippers, unprovided with poles, have been defeated in their effort to ascend with no other aid than their paddles. Then they leap overboard and seize hold of the gunwales, drag the craft up the rapids before it can be overcome by the turbulent water, and either driven downstream or capsized again. When the trippers encounter in shallow water, such obstacles are jammed timbers. Wading allows them carefully to ease their craft around or over the obstructions. When tracking their 6-fathom canoe or York boats or sturgeon crows, the voyagers of the North Brigades use very long lines, one end of which is attached to the bow of the craft, while the other end is secured a leather harness of breast straps called otapanapi, in which either each hauler adjusts himself. Thus, while the majority of the crew land upon the shore and so harnessed walk off briskly in single file along the river bank, their mates aboard endeavor, with the aid of either paddles, sweeps, or poles, to keep the craft in a safe channel. In the present instance, we had to resort to tracking, but it was a light character, for the canoes were not too heavily loaded, nor was the current too strong for us to make fair headway along the rough, pathless bank of the wild little stream. In each canoe, one person remained aboard to hold the bow offshore with a paddle or pole, while the others scrambled along the river bank, either to help haul upon the line, or in the case of the younger children and the dogs, simply to walk in order to relieve the craft of their weight, and also for safety's sake. Would the canoe overturn the current, the greatest danger is for the steersman to lose control and allow the canoe to get out of line with the current, as the least headway is a wrong direction is apt to capsize it. With us all went well until a scream from a child announced that a going goose, the second son, had fallen in, and anxiety reigned until the well-drenched chipmunk partly crawled and was partly hauled ashore, and then laughter echoed in the river valley, for the chipmunk was at times much going to frisking about and showing off, and this time he got his reward. But before we had ascended half the length of the rapids, we encountered the usual troubles that overtake the tracker, those of clearing our lines of trees and bushes, slipping into the muck of small inlets, stumbling over stones, cutting the lines upon sharp rocks, or having them caught by snares, roots, or driftwood. As we approached the last lap of the White River, the canoes passed through a rocky basin that held a 30 or 40-yard section of the river in a slack and unraveled pool. While ascending this last section, the last canoe, the one in which the old grandmother was wielding the paddle, broke away from Ukahu, and the strain severing his well-worn line, and away grandmother went, racing backward down through the turbulent foam. With her usual presence of mind, she exercised such skill in guiding her canoe that it never for a moment swerved out of the true line of the current, and thus she saved herself and all her precious cargo. Then, the moment she struck slack water, she in with her paddle and out with her pole, stood up in her unsteady craft, bent her powerful old frame, and her pipe still clenched between her ancient teeth, with all her might and main, she actually pulled her canoe right up to the very head of the rapids, and came safely ashore. It was thrilling to watch her, for she could render no aid, and when she landed, we hauled her with approval to her courage, for her courage, strength, and skill. Grandmother was annoyed. Her pipe was out. All right. Well, I am going to end the story there. The next section of the story is called Traveling at Night. And I will read 3 more sections next time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you all. God bless. Stay safe and stay awesome, y'all. Because you know what? Every single one of you is awesome and very much appreciated by me for coming. I'm going to leave the music play just a little while, and I hope you'll come listen to the next section. Bye for now.